Hi y'all, it's me again. I'm gonna continue reading from my book, Secret Lives of the First Ladies. And again, I'm at my boyfriend's place because he's not supposed to come till, actually it's not picking him up until like 10:35 or so. Okay, well here we go. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Edith Roosevelt had a strict moral compass that never varied, and that she was more than willing to apply to others. As First Lady, she summoned weekly meetings with fellow women of influence. Many of them cabinet wives, who were charged with keeping tabs on society folks who didn't share Edith's passion for proper behavior, from alleged adulteresses to husbands who visited the burlesque to notorious tipplers. Washingtonians with a tax morale code will watch their scandalous behavior dutifully reported to the First Lady, who dished out the appropriate punishment, being taken off the guest list for White House events. Dressing down. Though Edith Roosevelt wasn't the First Lady to chafe, I think it is, at the intrusiveness of the public's curiosity, she certainly was one of the most determined and fighting. Even fashion was off limits. After having her gown made for Theodore's inaugural ball, she instructed its creator to destroy the garment's design and even the fabric from which it was made, making it impossible for copies to be sold to a public eager to emulate presidential styles. Noah Mitten. Seminal to the progressive movement of the turn of the century, Theodore Roosevelt tended to have forward-thinking beliefs about women's education and suffrage, as well as the equality of African Americans. He invited Booker T. Washington to lunch at the White House, but Washington was one of the very few of his race to step into the executive mansion during the Roosevelt years. The First Lady, her progressive politics notwithstanding, took a rather different view toward blacks, and it wasn't all that favorable. In fact, she forbade any black women from coming to a single White House event. Who wants a drink? Nothing illustrates Edith Roosevelt's bullheadedness rather than her stance on prohibition. Also is known to have been suspicious of alcohol only to her father's bibulous behavior. She was a sort of Republican that viewed any government ruling on personal habits as a profoundly inappropriate intrusion on American liabilities. Hence, though something of a teetotaler, she positively loathes the ban on alcohol that came with the 18th Amendment. She immediately took to rebelling against it in her own way, throwing parties at Sycamore Hill in which she served cocktails to whoever wanted. She rarely partook of the stuff herself, but the act of getting other people drunk gave her a high all its own. That's a sign because her mama, which is the same mama as my boyfriend's mom, is going away for a few days. And she's sad about it. You know, Mama's been away for a few days before with Sage. She's just so cute. And if you didn't know, Sage is a pitty, or a pipple, that they rescued. They basically rescued all their dogs. So anyways, let's continue. Edith Roosevelt was a lifelong Republican and nothing, not even family, could dissuade her from her chosen political path. In 1932, her late husband's distant cousin Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democrat, ran for president. Many thought that because he was an in-law, Edith would rally to his support. Nope. An enthusiastic hater of public statements, Edith nevertheless broke her ban on speaking before the press to issue spirited support of Franklin's opponent, Herbert Hoover. It was the first time she ever made a speech to the media, and it was made for the sole intention of defeating a member of her family. Edith received a great deal of criticism for her treachery, and it was accordingly punished. FDR won the election. And if you didn't know, FDR is is TR's cousin. I don't know if it's cousin, first cousin, whatever. All I know is that they're cousins. They never really went into, I don't think they ever went into specifics like that on all the history stuff that I remember about Theodore Roosevelt and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I don't remember. Anyways, let's continue. Chapter 22. Helen Herron Taft. June 2nd, 1861 through May 22nd, 1943. Married June 19th, 1886. Hey. Oh, right behind me is my brother's siblings' dog, Ollie. Love you all. Presidential husband. William Howard Taft. Children. Robert Alfonso, Helen Herron, and Charles Phelps. Firstly, 1909 through 1913. Astrological sign. Gemini. Religion. Episcopalian. Soundbite. With my own experience, I can testify that a hot time in the old town makes a perfectly good funeral march when reduced to a measure sufficient lugubrious. What the fuck that mean? I don't even know. Anyways, when Helen Herron was 17 years old, she visited the White House with her family and discovered her life's ambition to return someday as First Lady. In fact, Nellie could have been president herself had she not lived at a time when such a thing was a pipe dream. To put it simply, this woman was a hotshot. She was born into a huge family in Cincinnati, Ohio, the fourth child of prominent lawyer John Williamson Herron and his wife Harriet Collins Herron. With money and connections all over the place, the Herrons were in a position to educate their 11 children and set them up for big things. Nellie ended up attending Miami University, where she acquired an undying passion for knowledge and all the doors that it opened. What's more, she excelled at almost everything. A fact that became as much a curse as a virtue when she found herself utterly confused as to which path to follow in life. Should she become a writer, a musician, activist, businesswoman? She taught for a while, worked in her father's law office, and hit the social scene of Cincinnati's aristocracy thing. Cincinnati's upper class with a blend of titillation and bemusement boredom. So she got a kick out of raising eyebrows by smoking cigarettes and quaffing beer at local taverns. It seemed more a way of dissipating boredom and not than anything else. She was passionate, observant, fiercely independent, and not a little frustrated at a woman's lot in the world. The wavering evaporated when she met William Howard Taft. He was a large, eventually very large, at over 300 pounds, jolly fellow whose infectious smile and sincerity made everybody around him feel all warm and fuzzy. He was also a darn good lawyer, but to Nellie, Taft's most attractive quality was his devotion to her. Will saw his beloved Nellie for the righteous star she was, and showered her with syrupy compliments about her wit, intelligence, and wide-ranging ability. She soon realized that he personified the answer to her ambition. Rather than chart a course for her own career, she could imprint all of her energy and brains onto her sycophant. White House, here we come. Surf's up! Helen Herron Taft was the first, and maybe only, First Lady to ride the waves in Hawaii. I did not know that. Cool. But not so fast. Following their marriage in 1886, Nellie's husband displayed a galling capacity to follow his own ideas about what he should do for a living. In If elective office and political power were the holy grail for Mrs. Taft, Will had his heart set on the bench. To his glee and her chagrin, he was appointed in 1887 to the Superior Court of Ohio. 3 years later, President Benjamin Harrison made him Solicitor General of the United States. Then it was back to Ohio in 1892, where Will hitched a ride on the federal circuit. The jolly jurist was living a dream, but his wife just stewed, fretting over what she viewed as the narrowing effects of the bench. To Nellie, the judge's robe looked more like a straitjacket, and she never missed an opportunity to judge Will toward grander ambition. Something grander came. Not from Will, of course, but from President William McKinley, who hit Taft in 1900 with a proposition that made Nellie's heart race with joy. Will was asked to lead a commission to the Philippines charged with establishing a new civilian government. For Mrs. Taft, adventure beckoned at long last, and the family, they had 3 children now, embarked upon an odyssey to the distant and exotic east. Grand? Nothing could be grander. Now Nellie Taft was truly in her element, and she would shine. After stopping long enough in the Hawaiian Islands for Nellie to give surfing a try, the Tafts arrived in the Philippines, where a military occupation by American forces since the conclusion of the Spanish-American War created a cowed and suspicious native populace. The Tafts set about undoing the damage, while Will waded through the daunting business of creating a civilian rule, a task he did aptly enough to be made Governor General. His wife set about making herself into the great white queen mother of her new Filipino churches. She took Spanish lessons. Nellie was a natural of foreign languages. Learned a few local dances, implemented healthcare modernizations through lively entertainments, and journeyed into remote island regions like a conquistador of old. She wasn't just tireless and inquisitive. She was also entirely without racism, remarkable for the age, imaginative, and an invaluable aid to her husband, whose ambitions became enormously popular. Taft took his Filipino mission seriously enough to turn down 2 offers of a seat on the Supreme Court back in the state. By 1903 came an offer from Washington that night that he nor his wife could refuse. President Theodore Roosevelt wanted his buddy Will to be his Secretary of War. Though it was hard for Nellie to give up her guilty existence in Milan's splendiferous Malacanang, I think that's how you say it, I don't know, palace, the cabinet appointment was in line with the kind of work I wanted my husband to do, she labeled. The kind of career I wanted for him and expected him to have. Having cut her political teeth in the Philippines, Nellie was now the fully invested partner attached with her, a role she would play to the hilt from then on. With her mission clearly laid out, Nellie infiltrated capitalist society to get her own take on its elaborate relationship, continued to browbeat Will into giving up his confounded preoccupation with the Supreme Court, and began pushing him for a presidential run in 1908. She got as far as the cabinet, damn it all, and she was going to jettison that White House dream now for anything. Not even her husband's dreams or his outspoken distaste for high-level politics. Taft became, in effect, the congenial front for his wife's ambition, and his reliance on her brains and skills occasioned the inevitable result. He surrendered. Besides Nellie's co-conspirator in the effort to get her husband psyched about the White House was none other than the indefatigable Theodore Roosevelt. It was a tag team that Will was powerless to resist. To his surprise, he won comfortably against his presidential opponent William Jennings Bryan. And so began the Taft administration, the Nellie Taft administration. Sir Will was president. This was a guy with heavyweight credentials under his belt, no pun intended. A genuine darling of the Republican Party who'd gone where he was through no small amount of cleverness and education. And despite his hammering over the dirty confrontations of the political arena, Taft had real leadership talent. but he continued to overlook, but he continued to look over at the Supreme Court building with big puppy dog eyes, his imagination conjuring images of black robes and weighty legal matter. What was he doing in the White House? Oh yeah, his wife. It wasn't that Nellie didn't believe in her as his generosity, expansive mind, or executive ability. It's just that she had too much going on upstairs not to become a huge part of the excitement that was the presidency. That energetic intellectual once dreamed of stepping into the White House as its occupants had arrived, and she felt the need to control, influence, shape. Congressmen coming to the White House soon discovered that it was impossible to speak with the president while his wife raced over to interject herself into the discussion. Nellie forcefully advised Will on treaty negotiations, cabinet appointments, tariff issues, and pretty much everything else that crossed his desk. Taft openly joked that he was a co-president, and the truth were less than an hour of nervous Nellie's meddling. I think that's how we get the saying nervous Nellie. I guess it's from Nellie Taft. I don't know. I'm just guessing by what I just read. The master staff considered her a tyrant and began showing the displeasure with resignation. It didn't help that she replaced the White House steward with a housekeeper named Elizabeth Jeffrey, a fellow pendant who drove the hired help like a chain gang. Then there were the Lyverin footmen who drew criticism from people who smelled aristocratic access. Washingtonians, whether they loved her or hated her, had to admit that the First Lady was a doer. Suddenly, tragically, it all came to an abrupt halt. Less than 3 months into the administration, Nellie suffered a stroke. The president, utterly disconsolate, took time away from his responsibilities to sit by Nellie's bedside and read to her, joke with her, coax that towering personality of hers back into her. Though it took over years, the First Lady came back to herself. She retained a slight speech impediment that would cause her some embarrassment, but Nellie returned to the role she adored so passionately, just in time to see it threatened by the resurgence of her husband's erstwhile friend. Theodore Roosevelt was back, and determined to regain the office of the presidency. Though Will had soldiered through a successful 4 years, Roosevelt thought them a betrayal of the progressive agenda. Their battle, which divided the Republicans, made it a cinch for Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson to defeat them both. A sickened Nellie wrote Tear off as a traitor and dismissed her husband as a bubbling jackass who hadn't seen it come. Humph, men! True that. She lingered over long in the White House before departing amidst the hushed anticipation of hostile servants who kept glancing at clocks, a paying diva whose time in paradise had come to an end, and much too soon. Nellie may have been bitter, but her husband was born anew. After teaching at Yale for a time, Will got his precious Supreme Court appointment in 1921. It was the zenith of his public career and allowed him to go with a smile when he finally passed in 1930. Nellie outlived him by 13 years, the highlights of which were annual trips to Europe. The scholarly adventurer never left her. As she years in the White House, she had few peers. Though a little power mad, this was a woman of unique influence and character. Frustrated with the female status quo, she made efforts to champion women's self-worth. Though interestingly, she didn't believe women fit for public office. A consummate student of the world, she never slacked in her devotion to reading everything from poetry to geology books, and her conspicuous lack of prejudice found expression on numerous occasions, from work with prominent Jewish families to create the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra to her efforts in the White House on behalf of impoverished immigrants at the time. When Americans were clamoring for an end to the influx of filthy undesirables, Nellie was even the first presidential wife to get her memoirs published in 1914. Julia Tyler may have coined the phrase Mrs. Peasant Interest, but Nellie Taft personified it. Please rate, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're on YouTube, please ring that bell notification so you can know when I upload. And if you're on TikTok, please like and follow my videos. And please pay for something on either my eBay and or Mercari. Okay? Bye. And please give me on YouTube, please give me to 300 followers. And on TikTok, please give it to like a thing like 10,000. Please help me. Okay, bye.